Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Today's episode, I have a great conversation with my guest, Lura Forcum. I probably said that incorrectly. I sincerely apologize. She told me how to say it and I forgot already. She is a great guest. She's an expert and has a doctorate in consumer psychology and helms at the Indepdent Center, a great organization that really focuses on the values of independent voters and informing them on political issues. She's not very interested in the political toxicity that helms at the Republican and Democratic side. She just wants independent voters to get what they need and adhere to what they value. We really dove into that conversation. We also dove into how the MAGA current climate plays into the value of independent voters as well. There's a lot of great information in this conversation. So I really do hope you guys enjoy, and make sure you guys check out all our information and the organization's information in the description. Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We're back at it again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a while since I had a guest episode, some cancellations, but we're back to discuss a very interesting topic: the value of independent voters, the value of independent candidates, especially in this current political system. I've talked about it plenty in terms of how different types of voting reform, and I'm probably going to propose you what you think about different type of voting reforms in the midst of this conversation that you may not know, you may do know. We'll see when we dive into that. But in order to talk about this, I have a great guest who is a expert in this field, so to speak. You said the last name. I'm not going to pretend I know how to say the last name. I'm just going to say Laura. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, tell us about her organization, and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation. So feel free.
Hi, Riddell. Thanks for having me. My name is Lura Forcum. I'm the president of the Indepdent Center, and we work with an audience of about 250,000 people who are just not happy with either party. And that's really how I would define an independent the way we think about it. So when we say independent at the Indepdent Center, we mean maybe people who vote for third parties, but also people who swing vote and split ticket vote. So, this last election, independents really delivered the election to Donald Trump. But in the election before, they went for Joe Biden. And before that, it was Donald Trump. So that swing voting is part of what we're talking about as being independents, or people who did things like, they voted for some Democrats on the ticket, but also some Republicans. And we can talk about why we think that's such an important force for political accountability and effectiveness.
All right. I do think that is so valuable. And we all understand hopefully people understand what swing states are and what they provide in these type of elections. But I do think oftentimes the conversation is centered around Republicans, Democrats, and I have different conversations all the time. Being completely blunt, nowadays, even though I consider myself purple, I definitely consider myself independent. I really focus on issues based off my values.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very critical of this current administration. So it's going to make me seem like I'm one certain way. But one thing I recognize is that oftentimes when I discuss things with Republicans or Democrats, it's very hard for me to convince them that they're wrong. But the thing that matters the most is not really trying to convince them that their moral framework, wherever it's embedded in, is incorrect, but trying to make it very either informative or understandable for the person who's just like working every day, just wants a better country, doesn't really care about this political rivalry, and reaching out to them. So I do think there's a lot of value in this conversation. Before we get into it, what is your political identity, your political background? I always like to let my audience know the type of person that they're talking to, the perspective it's coming from, to also elicit that no matter what political ideology you have, we can have a civil and very productive conversation.
Yeah. So I am definitely an independent. I don't have a party. I've been registered Democrat in the past. And I have voted for a mix of Democrats and Republicans, especially the last few years. So, I think like a lot of independents and kind of like what you're describing, right, is like I'm looking at issues, I'm looking at policy issues. I don't see either side as having all the answers. So yeah, I'm either, you could call me team neither, you can call me team both. But yeah, like this is what I think a lot of independents are actually doing, is what you're saying, is like, we want a country that works, and it doesn't seem like either side has the answer to that.
Very fair. Another question to kind of get to know the guest here. What is a hobby that you like to do that's very relatable to the average person? Sometimes when people hear political speak from individuals, they go like, "Man, this guy's a boring, or this girl's a boring political pundit that just be talking about politics all day. They don't got a life." And I mean, definitely have a life, but we got to relate a little bit. We got to understand. Yeah, we do normal things too. So what's something that you do? What's a hobby? What's something fun you do?
So one of my hobbies is baking. I love dessert. It's my favorite thing is eating dessert that other people made, or making dessert. And one of my major problems in life is that I don't have enough people around to eat all the stuff I want to make. So I'm a dessert pusher. I make it, then I push it on other people, and I'm like, here, help me get rid of this. And it's harder than you would think. Like, people are just eating more healthfully these days. So I need more people to eat dessert, but it's my favorite thing to find recipes and make yummy stuff.
I respect that. I respect that a lot. I am a huge dessert fan as well. I definitely frequent, but I have to make sure, especially since COVID, I gotta get in the gym and lock in a little bit before I let it
Yeah.
kind of get too much. So, love desserts as well. Love cakes, love ice cream, and love cheesecakes. There's some really good stuff. What's your favorite dessert?
Oh, my favorite dessert. I mean, the simple stuff I think is really the best. So I even love like a brownie from a mix. They don't have to be fancy to be good, but I find like it seems like the more I just like sweat it out in the kitchen doing complicated things, people are like, it's okay. It's the simple stuff that people lose their minds over. So
That's very fair. It's definitely the simple stuff. I was pretty bad into ordering Ferrero Rochers for a long
mm,
time. Those get you. Those they're not healthy at all.
I know that's why I gotta like get it out of the house. So I make it, but then it needs to go somewhere else.
All right. So before we dive into the value of independent voters in swing states, when you discuss their value, or when you're talking about someone who's kind of opposing your viewpoint or opposing what you're saying, what is the argument that they make that not necessarily something that is just like nonsense, because you hear some
Mhm.
arguments that are nonsense, but something that they make and then the average person would resonate, oh, that makes sense. Like, what is that argument that you hear that is valid, but you want to break down in today's conversation?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think one of the concerns is like it's just too complicated for regular people to understand all these policy issues and understand how complicated they are, and that if we don't have the party structure, that it will be just like a free for all, and people will be proposing stuff, and it won't mean anything because the parties are what make sure things stay on track and stay within certain parameters. So they're kind of like saying like, well, if we don't have these two parties, it'll be chaos. And I understand what they're saying, but at the same time, I think that's being a little unfair to voters who have complicated positions and who do want an alternative and who want to see some competition between the two parties. Because right now what's happened is they've really cut off the outside competition. They've like made the rules of the game in a way that they don't have to deal with outsiders. They don't have to deal with outside ideas and challenges. They just kind of point the fingers at each other and say, see, that guy's the problem. And we're kind of locked into this dance where nobody else can get in and shift the dynamic, because the parties make sure that no outside parties can get in to compete. They make it very difficult.
All right, fair enough. So let's start discussing this stuff. I
Mhm.
know you kind of gave a brief description on you and your organization, but go in depth on what you guys do and why it matters so much, especially in this current political landscape.
Sure. So we are a 501(c)(3), which is nonprofit tax exempt organization. And it means that our work is really limited to educational work. So what we do currently is we send out a twice a month newsletter to our audience of about 250,000 people. And we just talk about stuff that's going on in politics, stuff that's relevant to political independence. We try to break issues down in a way that's not partisan and that is kind of like the voice that you're not hearing from either side on different issues. We also have a website with resources. If you're somebody who would like to register as an independent and you want to know what would it look like to be an independent in my state, we have resources for those folks. So the truth of the matter is, it is different in most states. Like I won't say there's 50 different states and 50 different rules for registering as an independent, but there's a lot of variation. In some states, there are open primaries. In some states, there are closed primaries. Just lots of different things that you might want to take into consideration if you're going to change your party registration. Or like in my case, I live in South Carolina and we don't have party identification on the ballots. And so like I can't register as an independent. So that's helpful, I think, for people to know and for them to feel confident in exercising their vote as an independent. I've heard that in some states, if you're registered as an independent, it says unenrolled on your voter registration card. And it just means you're not enrolled in a party. But I think for a lot of people, if they saw that, they would say like, oh my gosh, I must not be registered. Do I need to do something? Right. And like, that's the kind of information that we're trying to bridge the gap so that people can be really confident. Like, I'm an independent and this is what I'm looking for when I go to the ballots, right? Or when I go to the election precinct. We also do quite a bit of research on everybody's political opinions, but we really focus on independence. So we do focus groups, we do surveys, we do some AI insights, and we're just trying to understand like what is it that's important to independents, because that also helps us talk to them about different policy issues in a way that connects with their values. So, in the last election, one of the big concerns for most voters, but also for independents, was economic issues, right? Like affordability and inflation. And so if we know that's important, then we can try to break down for you how different, policy proposals are going to affect that, right? So we can say, here's what the tax cut bill could mean for you, or whatever the issue is, right? Like we just try to relate it specifically to how independents are looking at things and what independents value.
All right. I do think that's very valuable. One thing I always preach on my podcast, depending on the flow of the conversation, is that there's such a value for educating the voter. There's such a value with like helping people become more educated with politics, and you would assume that in a social media era and in a internet era where everybody has a device like this and they can look up anything they want. Matter of fact, we now have AI that can look up things for you. That
Mm-hmm.
we become more educated. But I found that people, I do think there's a difference between having knowledge and understanding the knowledge. And right now, I feel like we're in a situation where people are gaining knowledge or being
Mm-hmm.
fed knowledge, which is a very potentially problematic thing, but they don't really understand what they're getting fed. What differentiates your program with like all these other individuals, political figures that are feeding people knowledge and kind of telling them what to think, and compared to like what you guys are doing, trying to help people understand with independent thinking and independent values?
Yeah, so we are trying to be the voice of things that neither party is saying. And I think a lot of people right now are sort of tapping out of political life because you have two parties that are talking about issues in a way that is kind of crazy and not very helpful, right? Like our policy conversations are things like, on the left, people are saying like, well, the environment matters and we need to do something about climate change. And on the right, the answer is like, no, we don't. Right. And like, that's kind of crazy because it's like the answer, as with most things, is somewhere in the middle. And we've like lost this ability to have a conversation where we get closer together on issues. We just end up like saying more extreme things. So we think it's really important to try and say like, well, what are the pieces of this like larger policy issue that nobody is commenting on, right? Like where's the consensus? Where is there agreement from some ideas that are coming from both sides? So part of what we're trying to do is be informative and like kind of say the thing that is the elephant in the room that's not making it into the regular political conversation. But the other thing we are really focused on is that like people should be able to make up their own minds. And so we're not here to tell people like, well, if you're an independent, it means you believe this. Like, we're not doing finger wagging, right? We're not saying like, we have the answers and here they are. We're trying to frame things more like, okay, if you care about affordability, here's how this bill will impact affordability, or how we might think that it will impact affordability, right? So we're really trying to give people the knowledge to let them make informed decisions, because we think individuals are the ones who are best equipped to decide for themselves, like what is right, what is best, what do you need? And I think, we have this tendency to kind of say like, well, we know better, right? Like, we're the informed people, we're the political experts, like we know, we're going to tell you. And I think a lot of voters are really tired of that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It gets quite annoying and pretty nihilistic when we have so many kind of extreme opinions, where
Mm-hmm.
it's either good or it's bad. And I try to tell people all the time that it usually lives in this gray area. I like how you brought up the climate change example, because of course, when it comes to certain people on the left, I go like, okay, climate change is important, but you are destroying the Mona Lisa to prove your point, and you're blocking people from going to work, and you're making it seem like it's the end of the world if we don't focus on it. And the right, oh yeah, climate change is not real, we shouldn't worry about it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, come on, like we gotta.
Yeah.
There's a middle ground that we don't have to be so extreme. It's so valuable in these situations when you have these loud opinions with prolific political figures, um, really kind of making the populace or certain parts of the populace really believe it's all in or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you try to either, I mean, this is kind of a two-part question. How do you potentially try to contextualize things for those people if you do? And then how do you reach out to the person, like the average person, go like, and help them understand the world is not as destructive as it seems, and really kind of bring them to a sense of normalcy? I think that's the best way to put
Mm-hmm. I think independents are such a force for normalcy, because one of the things that I think makes independents look at our current political climate and say, like, I don't want any part of this. This is crazy town and I'm out, right? One of the reasons they do that is because you have such extreme voices on both sides, and the voices are saying, like, I know that this is a bad idea because it came from the other side. I know it can't be right because it came from the other side. Like, I'm not going to engage with that idea. I'm not going to actually think about what it means and the pros and cons. I can totally dismiss it because it came from the other political side. And I think that's incredibly destructive. It's creating this really destructive dynamic in our politics. And so the answer is unfortunately not a short-term answer. It's not like, oh, if we just say it this way, we can reach people. But it is this idea that if you can get people to participate in politics in a nonpartisan way, where you say, yes, I think like in our minds, we don't have a model, most people don't, for coming to the ballot box and saying, I'm going to pick what I think is right, and I don't care what letter is after your name, right? But we need more people doing that, because that's how you get accountability, right? Because if you're a Republican, you're going to come, right, cast your ballot for people with R's after their name, and you're really not going to, it doesn't matter if they don't do the things they said they were going to do, right? It doesn't matter if you don't like the candidates. You've already decided that the D's are, the end of life as we know it and have to be avoided at all costs. So there's no accountability there, right? Like, if you're just a partisan person engaging in political life in a partisan fashion, there's really no accountability, right? Because you are just not going to switch sides no matter what. But if you're an independent and you're saying, no, tell me what you're going to do, and then show me you did it if you want my support, that actually is a tremendous force for accountability, because now the two parties are going to have to start listening to what you want, listening to what you think is important, proposing policies that address those things, and then actually delivering on it. And if they don't do those things, they're going to get voted out of office. And I think that's really what you saw with independents and Donald Trump in the previous election, right? In 2020, is that they looked at his handling of COVID and just said, you know what, this is not this is not great. This is not what we wanted. We're going with somebody else. And then they came back to him after this in 2024. And, independents are thinking really deeply about policy issues. And so I think that they looked at Trump and said, we think you're addressing economic issues better than the Harris campaign is. But already we're seeing in polling, the independents are saying, well, we thought we were going to do better, and we're not liking what we're seeing right now. We're not liking what we're seeing on immigration. We're not liking what we're seeing on the economy, tariffs, all of this stuff. So you have, like, these are such thoughtful, nuanced voters, and they're such a force for effective government. So I want more people to start thinking about their political participation this way. Like, if you're not happy with either party, it doesn't mean don't vote. It means go vote for whatever you think is best. And over time, the parties are going to have to come closer to pleasing independents in order to win and hold office. Just like demographically speaking, there are more and more independents every year, and you can't win the presidency without them. And that's a tremendous force for improving government. It's not an overnight solution, but it will work.
Yeah, I'm 100% there with you. When it comes down to it, it does seem even more so now, which is kind of crazy than ever, where people are more hell bent on supporting their side no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I want to preface this. This is my opinion. I'm not going to apply this to Laura by any means. That I am a big advocate for being like focus on the values that you attribute by. You don't really need a party telling you what to think. But right now, I truly do believe that, yes, I have issues with the left Democrats. I criticize them. I say certain things and certain issues. But I also think right now it's non-comparable when it comes to what's going on with the Democrats and what's going on. And I don't even like to call them Republicans. I just call them MAGA, because I do genuinely think Republicans are not MAGA.
Mm-hmm.
Like principle.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
So right now I'm like, yes, for me, they're not equatable. One is much worse than the other. So when that situation happens and you're reaching out to certain people and they're like, okay, I get it. My side has issues, but why are you saying we're bad like these guys? Mm-hmm. How do you deal with those type of people who believe that I'm not hearing this conversation because one side is much, much worse? Do you try to, make them understand, or do you kind of meet them in a certain level of common ground? How do you deal with those kind of people right now? Because this is a weird type of political landscape we are right now.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that one of the really important things that we can do is talk to each other face to face and try to understand what other people are seeing instead of trying to persuade them. So, I agree with you that it is not the case that the two parties are equivalent to each other. And I think when you go down this path of both sides, the both sidesism, right? Like that's not good. But we also don't really need to like get a ruling on who's worse, you know? Like I think we need to stop thinking about politics like there's a good guy and a bad guy. And I think that's hard because human brains are just wired to see these dualities, right? Where if there's a good guy, there must be a bad guy. And if somebody was hurt, there must be somebody hurting. We tend to, it's called like completion, because where we see one piece of the puzzle, we tend to mentally add in the other piece. And I think that's created some real issues in our political life, because instead of saying, I don't think that the way that the Republican Party or Trump administration is handling the immigration problem is the way I believe it should be handled, right? Like instead of saying that, we have to say, well, they're fascists, right? Or they hate the Constitution, or they're racists, or whatever, they're bigots. And this is really not helpful, right? Because then if you're a Republican, you're just defensive. You can't hear each other. And we end up just shouting at each other. And my answer is like, there are problems with all policies. There are problems with all politicians. We should be more critical of both sides. And one of the things that really concerns me is that where we have this like black, white, good, bad view of our side versus the other side, I think what a lot of people are doing is saying like, well, when my party is in power, I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to hold them accountable because I've already assumed that they're the good guys. Nothing that they do could be bad. That's not good for politics, right? Like we want everybody to look at our elected officials and say, you know what, that's a line that you're crossing. You can't violate the Constitution. You cannot violate people's right to due process. You cannot suspend habeas corpus without a really good reason, right? If you're very deeply partisan, I think there's a real temptation to look at your own side and just kind of excuse whatever they do. And that's not how we get political accountability.
I think that is very fair. 100%. Sometimes I can get pretty into it, go like, man, you're leaning towards a certain type of term that I don't want to use, but it can happen for me, of course, when I see certain things that I do think is very pessimistic. But speaking on the pessimism of discussing politics and seeing different things that you have issues with, whether it's the stuff that the MAGA administration is doing that a lot of people believe is leaning on unconstitutional. Some people do say that it leans fascist potentially.
Mm-hmm.
They're very nihilistic in terms of what MAGA is doing. And then we have the whole stuff with Iran and Israel. It's like, I thought we weren't getting into any more wars. What is going on? And then they look at Democrats and the left and they look at them and go like, I mean, okay, you guys are not as bad as this guy, but Joe Biden was old as hell. I don't want him to be president. Like, what is going on? Yeah, he's not him, but he's old. Does he even know his ABCs anymore? What's going on? And then they, bring up stuff. And I personally don't believe that this is a generalized Democratic view, but it is perceived as a full Democratic view when they talk about trans stuff and LGBTQ stuff and make that a forefront on what it means to be Democrat potentially. So this person, the independent we're looking at, they go like, okay, he sucks and this sucks, but I don't agree with anything here. And this guy's super old. What
am
do
I supposed to do?
Yeah, like at this point, how do you help people not become pessimistic? How do you help people not become nihilistic and just, there are people out there, and it's unfortunate to say it because I've been seeing it and I've been trying to like communicate with these people that go like, well, who cares? I don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with me. How do you reach out to those people?
Yeah. So, I mean, I believe really deeply in taking people seriously when they tell me that like it's not interesting, it's not important to them. Like if that's you are entitled to that. So like, first of all, I don't argue with people when they tell me what's important in their lives. I want to listen, I want to hear, I don't want to argue. For people who are thinking like, oh my gosh, can this get any better? Like, what can I actually do? We would say a couple of things. So one of those is your local government is a great place to engage, even just in your community. Like, start talking to people that you think you don't agree with on politics. You know, it's like in communities, in city government, county government, these are places where they have real responsibilities that they have to get stuff done in a way that the federal government doesn't. So if you're talking about your city, like, you got to get kids to school, you got to pave roads, you got to collect the trash, you need running water, right? Like, that stuff is non-negotiable. And that's why there tends to be more trust in local government, because at the end of the day, whatever your political views are, you have real problems that you have to address, right? Like, you have to live together. So if you want to get involved in politics, like, you go to a city council meeting, go to a board meeting for your county, and like, tell people what you think, listen to what they think. I think that if you actually want to take steps to get involved, there's real opportunity there. And the closer you are to government, the more impact you can have. So what we think could be really powerful is to start electing some independents to the United States House of Representatives, right? Because that's actually much more feasible than trying to win the presidency, for example. And then as you get more of these independents into office, what would happen is nobody would have a majority in the US House of Representatives. It wouldn't be neither main party would have a majority, and they would have to win over the small group of independent members. And I think that could be really helpful for bringing government back to a focus to being effective, to creating consensus, instead of just having this attitude of like, oh, we won, so we're going to do whatever we want. That attitude is really healthy. It's unhealthy, excuse me. It's not democratic. And that's what getting some independents into office could really address. So it's not an overnight solution, but I think as people start to develop this identity of like, I'm an independent, and here's what that looks like for participating in politics, like, that's where we're going to start to see more candidates who run as independents. And we're already seeing people who are running for governor as independent. People who are running for mayor as independent. There are a handful of independent mayors already. And so I think this is starting to reach people's attention. I know last week there was the big fuss when Elon Musk started tweeting about it. And then the day before that, Karine Jean-Pierre, the Biden press secretary, she said that she was independent, and it kind of got wiped out by the Musk thing. But you hear more and more people saying, you know what, I don't think either of these parties is right for me. And I think there's this like growing consensus, and it's really powerful. And exactly what that means is going to continue to emerge as voters make their wishes known.
I do think there's something valuable there, in terms of including more independent candidates, as we're seeing right now when it comes down to, bills trying to get passed. It typically is as simple as all Democrats vote for their side and all Republicans vote for their side. Now we're in a very tricky one where usually it's okay, Democrat, whoever got control of the House and the Senate, they're probably going to get their bill passed, more than likely. And the presidents, for the most part, never really try to go too far. Well, with the big, beautiful bill, we're entering a very interesting situation where Donald Trump does have control of the House and Senate for the most part. But there's a lot of Republicans that are now looking at it and going like, I don't know about this one. This one is wild for a lot of reasons. If you guys listen to my podcast, I broke down the entire bill, all the crazy stuff with AI and how it inflates the national debt. It's kind of insane. But that said, it's very clear that these marginal people, not marginal, but these people inside the House and the Senate, these individuals have so much power in swaying these votes because they tend to be pretty close unless it's very clearly good for the American people, like the no tax on tips. I feel like everybody pretty much said, oh yeah, let's pass that through. So we are seeing a lot of value with even one person being in Congress that can sway whether or not a bill gets passed. So I guess the question is now, okay, vote for more independent candidates. How do these independent candidates even compete though with these Democrats, with these Republicans because they have a few things. They obviously have a certain type of institutional foundation in terms of the presence on who they are. They have money. That's the biggest thing. They have a lot of money, and they have the backing of prolific figures. Anybody Donald Trump basically backed is like, oh yeah, all the Republicans are going to vote for him.
Yeah.
So how do these independent candidates even compete in this landscape?
Yes, so it is very hard, and the parties, like, one of the few things they actually agree with each other on is that they don't want any competition. So they make it incredibly hard for independents to run. The laws, and I'm not an expert in election law, so I just want to say that at the outset, but the rules about how you get on a ballot as an independent make it way harder for that independent to get on compared to somebody with an R after their name or somebody with a D after their name. So there are any
Did she get cooked?
lose you? Oh, sorry about that.
Are you back?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I just lost video for a sec.
Okay.
Do you want me to like do that one again, or?
I don't even. Yeah, just start from the. Well, let me see. So you don't have to say everything you said. I'm trying to remember where you left off. You were talking about. Honestly, just start from the beginning. Yep.
Okay, so the question was like, about
what
the
do
resources?
Independent candidates? I think the last thing you said is like, I'm not an expert on this.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm not an expert on election law, but what I can tell you is that the parties make it very hard to get on the ballot if you are not a Republican or a Democrat. That can mean that you need thousands more signatures to get on a ballot in one state compared to a Republican or a Democrat. There's also the issue of resources, right? Where the party machine raises just insane amounts of money in order to support a candidate running for office. And so that is absolutely a challenge. But my background is in marketing. And one of the things I can tell you is that it tends to be a lot more cost effective when you're presenting an appealing option to somebody, right? Like an appealing candidate, it costs less money to advertise that person and get people to support them because people like it. And I think part of the reasons that elections are so expensive for Democrats and Republicans is because they're trying to get voters. They're convincing voters to go to the polls for these candidates that people really do not like. There's kind of a lack of authenticity. There's like a lack of accountability. And so I think independents actually can have a huge advantage, which is they don't report to a party boss. They're not beholden to anybody. They can go out there and say, well, yeah, on these issues, I have these positions that maybe are more similar to Republicans. And on these issues, I have these positions that are more similar to Democrats. And that would never fly if you were a member of a party, but it's actually a lot more sensible. And one of the things that I think is really important to know about independents is they really value consensus and bipartisanship from elected officials. And the thing is, that's more similar to how almost all of us live our lives, right? Like we have family members who we disagree with on issues. We have friends that we disagree with on issues. We work in offices where we disagree on issues, but we have to live together so we solve our problems, right? Like we see where we can agree. We agree to set aside differences. When we make mistakes, we apologize. And that is the normal way to live. And the only people who aren't living like that are in Washington, D.C., right? Like this is just bizarro world where you don't talk to people who disagree with you, right? Like you can't entertain their ideas. And I think most normal Americans are like, what kind of game are you playing? So I think independents have a huge opportunity to lead by doing the things that most normal people do. And I actually think they're going to be able to win elected office, especially in districts. I think there are some districts where an independent would do really well. So I think it's going to be challenging, and the parties are going to absolutely make sure it's challenging. But I do think it's doable, especially if voters come out and are like, you know what, this is what I want to see.
So before we kind of take a broader scope and kind of try to understand the value of swing states, I'm gonna include this bit because I am curious on if you're what you think about it. So I 100% agree with a lot of things that you're saying. One of the things that I've talked about here on the podcast is voting reform. And I've talked about it. I came across it by accident. And by accident, I was able to find out, or at the very least, understand that potential voting alternatives could be more applicable to resonate with what the people want.
Mhm.
I'm sure the most popular one right now is ranked choice voting, but ranked choice voting is getting a lot of backlash. There's a lot of inefficiencies, and I've learned that on my kind of journey and learning about voting reform. And I've come to meet and learn about these other ones, such as star voting, such as what's it called, plurality voting. So there's other methods that seem to be more efficient than ranked choice voting that could definitely be good for the people. One that I'm definitely the most closely tied with is star voting and the Equal Vote Coalition. Have you heard about different voting reforms, or have you even thought about the value of voting reforms that honestly not only can help people choose candidates, and if you need me to explain what star voting is, I can, but not only help people kind of vote for candidates they care about, but also gives more credence and value to be willing to vote for independent third party
Mhm.
candidates other than just Democrats and Republicans. So, well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am not familiar with star voting. I've heard of it, but I'm not acquainted with the details of it. I am familiar with the two, I think, main reforms, which are ranked choice voting and open primaries. And yeah, I think that they could make a real difference for changing the political dynamic we have right now, right? Like, I think one of the things that's really important to say is that different voting regimes have different, they create different types of behaviors, right? And one of the reasons things are so polarized right now is because we have this winner take all kind of setup in American politics. So once you have 51% of the vote, it's like, oh, well, that's all you have to do, right? Like it creates this kind of just barely over the margin, and now you can do whatever you want. That's not great, right? And so I think ranked choice especially offers some really interesting possibilities for how it might change how we talk about politics, how people think about policy proposals in a way that's really helpful. And the other thing that I think is really important about ranked choice voting is that you don't have to do it, right? Like you can, if your state passes ranked choice voting, it means you go and you pick your top choice and then you rank the remaining choices. But if you don't want to rank, you don't have to. So you can continue to cast a vote the same way that you always have. And I think that that is really helpful because it doesn't mean that like voting has to get really complicated and now you need to understand every single candidate and every single um, policy issue that's on the ballot. So I think it could really change things in some positive ways. But I'd love to hear more about star voting.
Yeah, so I definitely, if you're interested, I can get you in contact with the person in charge. Her name is Sarah Wolk, and they've been doing a lot of good things for that movement. Like I said, I've come to find out, had her on the podcast, talked about it, and she talked about some really great things, and the kind of battle with voting reform going on right now. It's an interesting situation, but ultimately, the idea of star voting is that people have the opportunity to choose and vote for a candidate from Democrat, Republican, third party, and you can give your opinion on all of them. You don't really you don't have to just choose. This is the common term, the lesser of two evils, where it's like, oh man, I have to choose this Democrat, Republican. No, you can give your opinion about every single candidate on that ballot right there. And you just basically choose what you think about the candidate from a star system from 1 to 5. 5 being, oh yeah, I really love the candidate, 1 being, oh, this candidate I don't like at all. And kind of similar to what you were saying, if you don't want to give any opinion about anybody, you don't have to. And it kind of runs a more efficient system in the sense that there's kind of a runoff. So
Mhm.
the top 2 highly rated ones get moved on to a second round. And then based off like what people generally think about those 2, based off how they're voting, that's the one who wins. So you're allowed to give your opinion about every candidate you're about to go. You can say whatever you got. If those independent candidates are more than likely not going to win, your vote is not wasted because you also can give your opinion about the Democrat candidate versus the Republican candidate. So at the very least, your independent candidate doesn't win. You can ensure at least this Democratic candidate wins because I don't want this Republican candidate win, or other way around, of course. So, um, like I said, if we could talk about it a little bit after, but I do think there's a lot of value in kind of introducing these things of like voting reform, in addition, because I think it coincides perfectly, helping educating and informing independent voters, because a lot of them want to go out and vote, but like you said, they go like, well, I only could choose this Republican, Democrat. And
Mhm.
then some people are so nihilistic, which to be fair, I understand. I want to vote for this independent candidate, but they're not going to win.
Yeah.
So I might as well not waste my vote.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes it's hard because even though the guy's really good or the girl's really good, they just feel like that this vote won't matter, or even worse, they don't vote at all.
Mhm.
So yeah, there should be a serious conversation, in my opinion, on like, okay, voting matters. Let's make it matter more. So
Mhm.
let's just make it more efficient. There's nothing wrong with making things better. That's what America should be about. That's why amendments exist, right? Um, but to kind of take a step back in terms of swing states, can you define and tell the people like what are swing states? Some people may still not know why they're important, why they're valuable, what they mean for an election. So can you kind of explain it for
Mhm.
the people?
Yeah, so swing states are just states where they tend to go back and forth between Republican or Democrats holding office at a particular level. So, a state where they go back and forth between Republican and Democrat governor, for example, or senators. Um, or they will, I think it can also include where people will have, like, say, the state went for Donald Trump for president, but then elected a Democratic governor, right? Or has a Democratic governor and state house. So this is interesting to people because it suggests that there's not an obvious preference for one party or the other. So it's in some sense it's sort of like, oh, maybe these guys are kind of centrists. I think it can be a little bit disorienting for the state though, because it's like, if you're swinging back and forth between a Republican controlled government in one 4-year period and a Democratic one in another 4-year period, I think, especially things are going the way things are going right now, you would have a lot of instability and uncertainty. So I think there is some reason to look at those swing states and say, well, maybe an independent would do well here. But another thing you could consider is states that tend to go blue or tend to go red are places where an independent could do well, because just because a person of the total opposite party can't do well doesn't mean that somebody a little closer to the center wouldn't have some success, right? And I think the idea is like, right, maybe there's not enough support in the state for somebody of the total opposite party, but you could probably attract a lot of voters who are just getting a little bit closer to the center. So I think there's a few different ways that you could look at states and say, well, you know what, this could be a fit for an independent here and we should give it a try. The main thing I think we all need to listen to is the people who are saying independents can't get elected and they can't win are the parties. And part of the reason they're saying that is because they've done their best to make it so the independents can't win. But also, they're just looking at data that's focused on their party's voters. They really don't know anything about the rest of the voters in that state. So I don't think we should listen to them if they're saying independents can't win. But I absolutely take your point earlier about people worry that they're throwing away their vote for an independent who can't win. And I think That's a legitimate concern. And really, the best thing that we can do is motivate more people to come out and vote who are actually independents, who want to think differently about the two options in front of us.
Fair enough. It is a quite interesting thing how a lot of these elections just come down to, can you convince the swing state? Can you adhere to the swing
Mhm.
state? Can you politicize the swing state? It's an interesting kind of dilemma or dynamic we have right now in terms of current politics. One thing, other than like trying to adhere to swing states, and that one's kind of tricky because you got to adhere to the things that they care about. You kind of listed that there are certain data. The big one for this recent election was the economy, because to be honest, my perception at the very least is a lot of people were upset at the economy, but I feel like the entire world was upset on the economy. And
Mm.
I just think it was COVID, and there's really not much you could do about it. It's just like, can you improve as best as you can? I think that was the thing that matters the most. But ultimately, I understand people were upset. People are not going to look at the grand scheme of things. They're going to look at their wallet. They're going to look at their grocery prices and go like, well, this guy was in charge and he didn't do good enough. So I'm like,
Mhm.
I understand it. It is what it is. So that was one of the big picture things that Trump was appealing to, and then obviously blaming everything wrong in the world, everything wrong in the world because of immigrants. So just
Mhm.
kick them all out as well. So big political issues you focus on. That's how you adhere to the swing states. One of the other strategies that I've noticed that MAGA has done honestly pretty well is appeal to the youth. Right. So that's another part of this equation is the next voting demographic, the ones that are going to shape the politics in the future, they can be very much captured and they can be enamored. Charlie Kirk went across so many different colleges and institutions, appealing to specific, like young white male individuals, but they became very much not loyal, but very much siding with the side of Republicans. And that's a large demographic of America. So when it comes to independence, informing voters, the value of that, how do you reach out to the youth? How do you make them understand values that they necessarily don't even have yet? They're brand new in this space. They don't even really know who they are at this point. So
Mhm.
how do you reach out to the young people?
You know, what's interesting is that younger generations are far more likely to be independent. So Gen Z and millennials are 52% independent. And it's fascinating. I think there's been this tendency to look at younger voters and say, sort of like, well, we know millennials are young and liberal. So that must mean that people who are even younger are even more liberal. But I don't think the data bears that out. I think Gen Z is actually quite complicated in its views, and it's not across the board liberal. They you know, they do some really interesting things. They have some interesting perceptions of what it means to be successful, what it means to make money, what kind of like families and like, you know, what their version of the American dream is. So, you know, in terms of how you reach them, I think one of the things that appealed to them about Donald Trump is his authenticity. And you may say, like, but he's, you know, he's like authentically not a great person. That's what a lot of people say. And so that's true. But I think they have kind of gotten accustomed to having a lot of direct access to celebrities through things like podcasts and social media, right? Like
Yeah.
if you follow a rapper, a singer, they at this point they're making their own content, right? Like they're holding up their phone, they're talking into it, they're talking directly into you or into the phone, they're talking to you is what it feels like. And I think that the younger generations have gotten used to this feeling of like directness and I'm not having media sort of create this scripted interview, right? It's just this person. And so I think that that's something that the Trump administration kind of, I don't know if they did it deliberately or lucked into it, but I think the Rogan podcast had a huge impact on turning out some younger men for Trump. And, I don't look at their voting behavior and say, like, these are Republicans. I think these are people who turned out for Trump. I think that a lot of people had concerns about Kamala Harris and knowing what she stood for. And she maybe would have had a better shot at rectifying those concerns if she'd done something like podcasts, right? Where she was just on the hot seat for 2 hours of questions and they weren't vetted. There's no editing, right? Like, I think that people feel like that's giving them a better view of what somebody's actual positions are. So I think that authenticity is what the younger voters are responding to. And I think future candidates are going to have to go out there and make the rounds on podcasts and sort of open themselves up for questions and a real conversation. And I don't think that it's the case that, like, they have these specific values, right? Where they're like, oh yeah, I voted for Donald Trump because I agree with his position on, like, our foreign affairs policies, right? Like, or our immigration policies. I think it was just kind of like, who do I think I have a better understanding of?
I think that is very potent, honestly, because I look at the current and the newest generation, and you kind of see who a lot of their role models are becoming. A lot of these people are very much navigating towards YouTubers, towards streamers, like you said, towards podcasters. And one thing that makes their content so genuine or so appealing is because they seem like you. They seem like a normal person. You kind of understand who they are, and it makes it relatable. And to all things wrong with Trump, one thing you could definitely say is he's going to show you exactly who he is every single time. He's not going to beat around the bush. So I do think there's something to that, and I actually do think that there's a lot of value to that, to the point where you can kind of adhere to a lot of the things that a lot of these politicians say in these situations. That, I guess, I don't know, it's hard to say if it helps or doesn't help Donald Trump. I would argue it probably doesn't. I mean, it probably does help him, but you can always go back to something he said pretty blatantly and go like, he said this in this situation. This is who he is. Like, you don't have to imagine a version of him. He's very clear on the type of person he is. There is something to that, and it was kind of brand new compared to, like, the old vet that's been in politics for so long, and Joe Biden. Regardless of what you think about him, that's definitely something you could say. He was in politics for a very, very, very long time. He plays the political game to a T. I guess for your organization, I am curious to see or try to understand that your guys' point of view for this. Do you think that is a wise way to approach things moving forward for the youth? Like, if you guys, like you said, you inform voters, you try to compile data on what these independent voters care about most, and try to adhere on what it means to be independent and what value that they have in the voting system. But if we have a specific, very potent demographic of people that are like, well, I care about authenticity, I care about them being real, is that something that you guys will preach? Is that something that's like, well, that's cool, but there's more to running the government than authenticity? How do you navigate that? That one's a little bit more tricky, but definitely understandable.
Yeah, I think, we don't work directly with candidates and we can't promote candidates, but I think in general, telling candidates that they're going to have to put themselves out there and feel like people have access to them if they're going to be accessible is just the reality that you can't escape. I think voters are savvy enough to recognize that there's more to it than just, being a funny interview on Rogan, right? Like, you're going to have to ultimately do more than that to govern effectively. And I certainly agree that, like, authenticity is not the full list of characteristics I want to see when I'm trying to decide who to vote for. But it's interesting because I think that older generations are used to watching cable news. And in fact, if you look at the data now on where people get their news, it's really only baby boomers and I think like the older years of Gen X that are still watching cable news. Like the average age of cable news viewers is like 72. And those are people who the way they look at it is, I know that you are qualified and like respectable and a legit politician because you put on the makeup, you go to the TV studio and you answer the questions that you guys already negotiated, right? To them, that's what symbolizes or signals that somebody's serious. Younger people are just the opposite. They're like, what? That's totally fake. Why would I listen to what you say on a scripted television interview? I need to hear what you actually say after you've been talking and answering questions for an hour and 30 minutes. And so I do think that like voters are going to be looking for something a little bit more specific in terms of policy positions. But I think politicians are starting to get the memo. And the other thing is, I think younger people who are either candidates for elected office or in elected office are seeing, it's just, this is the reality they live in too, right? Like you see AOC going on Twitch, right? Like that sort of way of interacting with people, I think is just going to become inescapable. And so I hope as people get more interactions, they're also really pressing for answers on like, well, what do you think we need to do about the deficit? How are we going to fix Social Security? How are we going to modernize immigration so that we fix these problems instead of our current strategy, which is like round people up and put them on planes? Right? Like I think voters know the difference between somebody who's just funny on a podcast and somebody who has actually thought about what good policy would look like.
Fair enough. I definitely coincide with that. The political landscape is 100% changing, and we're seeing a lot of different figures trying to make a name for themselves in different ways. And we got people like Gavin Newsom really hitting that internet tour and doing some. I'm not gonna lie, I was like, okay, Gavin Newsom, I didn't know you were like that. All right, respect it. All right, you fighting back a little bit on the internet. He also had that podcast episode with Charlie Kirk that a lot of people were like, oh, he seems more reasonable than I expected. There's another guy that I forget his name. I think his name is Pete something that he's been going around. I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, I didn't know how to say the last name.
I always stumble over it. I think everybody will know who we're talking about.
Yeah, he's also doing some rounds by going on the internet. Of course, AOC, as you mentioned, definitely going rounds, very applicable to the youth right now and the young. So the internet, the social media is going to be very powerful to really become, as we've been talking about, relatable to these individuals and authentic to these individuals, of course. I guess the last thing I want to ask before we kind of start wrapping things up is that with everything we're talking about, the value of independent voters, what they mean in terms of politics, and the value of independent candidates and what they can mean going forward, because I really appreciate the idea of just focusing on the values instead of focusing on these ideologies. One of my mottos is political solutions without political ideology or something like that. I forgot my own motto. So that is something that I really care about because there are particular things that I care about issue-wise that I don't really care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Let's talk about these solutions. And that could be a good way if we have more independent candidates focus on solutions versus the winning elections, right? With that said, we've talked about it a bit, but I'm very curious to see how you guys will operate moving forward. We are truly in a different kind of political landscape. Before this election, while I had the podcast, I've been saying for a while, we're kind of like the most divided we've been since maybe the Civil War. And ever since Trump got elected, I think it's getting even worse. So we got a lot of things going on. By the time this podcast drops, we have the military parade that Donald Trump wants to do for some reason going on right now. And we got the No Kings protest also happening right now. So this is a weird kind of political landscape. And I know you said you guys don't endorse candidates, but how do you operate in this current climate when you see what is going on and all this strife going on currently? I mean, independents are important, but in this climate, I think people would argue, no, we're really focusing on what is MAGA doing right now,
Mhm.
more so than anything else. Like we can't focus on the issues until we like ground this stuff out.
Mhm. So, I mean, a few things I would say. I think both sides are getting more extreme because they don't feel heard, right? And you can understand why they wouldn't, right? Because we're just calling each other names when we disagree with literally the letter after their name. So I've done research, and there's other people who have done research that suggests that like people are actually not nearly as divided on issues and larger political philosophy as you might imagine. We're actually like really close together on a number of important issues, including the economy, the environment, abortion, immigration, right? Most people are much more close to the middle, but we talk about each other like the other side are just terrible human beings. And I think, as you have these like enraged people on the left and enraged people on the right, what they're doing is they're making their words stronger because they don't feel heard. And so they're assuming like, well, if you didn't hear me when I said I thought Trump was a bad president, maybe you'll hear me when I say he's a fascist, right? Or if you didn't hear me when I said, hey, Joe Biden's mental capacity doesn't seem great, right? Maybe you'll hear me if I dial it up to 11 and tell you that he's, something totally insane, right? Like I've heard some crazy conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
Like
like
he's
he has dementia and then he's a
Mhm.
puppet for
Yes, that he's just a puppet. So that's not, I understand why people are doing it because they want to feel heard, but it is really turning our political discourse into something that's just not helpful at all. So I think one of the first things that we all have to do is start listening to the other side. I think we have to stop assuming that we know what somebody thinks about an issue just because of the letter after their name, or even worse, because of their demographic characteristics, right? Like I feel like people looked at, I think Democrats looked at Hispanic voters and said, well, we know we've got Hispanic voters. Of course they vote with us. They always have. And it's like, wait, did anybody think to go talk to Hispanic voters and say, what do you care about? What's important? Right. And it's just, we're making assumptions that we know what other people think and is in their heart because of how they checked a box in a ballot. And it's just not true, right? Like when you reduce somebody to one characteristic, whether it is their skin color, their gender, their party identification, you're dehumanizing them because they are complex individuals with all these different facets to them. And like, yeah, maybe they voted for Trump, but if you go and assign all these other meanings to that without actually talking to them and saying like, well, what did that mean to you? Why was that your choice? Right? Then like we can't govern ourselves together if we don't actually understand each other. So my big push for everybody is like, talk to people that you think you disagree with. If you, and not to persuade them, right? Like listen and see what is important to them. I think we're all guilty of assuming that there are these huge gulfs between us and our values, right? And we're saying that people are hateful. We're saying that people are like this NPC term, right? When I started hearing that, like, that's a terrible thing to say about somebody. And we can't keep talking to each other like that. And I don't know how we can come back together as a country if we keep seeing the stuff on my social media, right? Like I see people saying like, well, you're just a bad person over political party. So like this, let's try to stop doing that. Like, let's try to understand the people we disagree with. I'm not saying let's try to all agree with each other. I'm just saying, what if instead of assuming that you know what somebody believes, you actually talk to them about it? I think that's where we start. And I think eventually maybe politicians will catch on and they'll start hearing voters, because I think right now they're really not hearing voters. They cater to their base and they forget about everybody else. And it's enabled them to have tons of power, raise tons of money. It's not good for voters. It's not good for the country.
I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. I do think there's a lot of value to that. And I do think more people should think like that and be like that. I always say that, yeah, I know quite a bit about politics and I'm pretty logical, but like, I'm not going to lie. I prefer someone nice like this to be in charge instead of me. Ultimately, though, when it comes down to this situation, I do think there's something powerful or something potent to distinguish trying to appeal to voters versus kind of appealing to the leadership, so to speak. Because before all this kind of Donald Trump, at the very least, from my personal perspective, I probably leaned more center right. I mean, I was even in the military versus anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everything with this Donald Trump stuff, I personally believe that I genuinely don't think Donald Trump is a good person. So I also don't think certain parts of his leadership are not good people either. But ultimately, I do think there's something powerful to also be able to go not apply what I believe about those people to the voters that voted for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that is very important because sometimes I can get a little like, bro, this guy said this. And then we got Charlie Kirk saying, you know what, let's just get rid of immigrants in general. I'm like, bro, I don't know how you can justify this, but I understand why you are in this position. So I have to be able to reach out to you while still keeping my feelings about those people up there. So
That's
that
such
is
a
a
great point. I mean, I wish more people thought that way, because I absolutely think there's a tendency to be like, yeah, if you voted for that guy, that must mean that you're like him and that you endorse everything he did. And that's just not true. And I also think we like to believe that because it simplifies the world for us, right?
yeah.
Because then we don't have to do the work of understanding other people. We can just be like, you know what? I'll just pretend that you are all the worst things I can imagine. And then it doesn't matter what you think, right? Like, who cares? Because you're a bad person. I already know. That's crazy, right? And like, that's dehumanizing. And we can't live together if we treat other people in this manner.
Yeah, because I've met a lot of great people before. Obviously, this recent election and all the Jan 6 stuff. Like when I was in liberal arts college, I was close friends with someone who was a Donald Trump supporter. He was a great guy. He was fun and all that stuff. I don't know how he is now, but at that point in time, like we were very cool and we were very friendly with one another. So yeah, there could be genuinely good people who just made certain decisions based off whatever. At the very least, I'm going to put it like this for these people. Yes, you will talk to some MAGA supporters that no matter what you say, they will support Trump. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I can't reach you. You're gone. I can't reach you. But by having a conversation with you and kind of breaking down and being civil and breaking down the logic, another person looking at it was like, wait, that made a lot of sense. That okay. Maybe I was wrong about
Mm-hmm.
that. Like there's more people that you could potentially reach out to if you're civil, if you break down things logically, if you try to understand it versus you just like demonizing them, then this other person's like, oh well, you're just as bad as them, you're just doing
Mm-hmm.
the same thing they're doing. So yeah, there's a lot of power, but I agree, it is very difficult. It is hard. It's not an easy thing to do, especially with this current social media landscape where it's
Mm-hmm.
like ever turning. It's not getting better in that sense. So I can see why people become nihilistic. But at the end of the day, if you want a better country, you can't give up on that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you put that. And, political identification is like such a small piece of who we are. We are moms and dads and sisters and daughters and brothers, right? Like we are all of these things. And we can connect in so many other ways. It's like, why are we so focused, laser focused on this one area where we have different values? Like we can relate in other ways. We're citizens of our neighborhoods and counties and towns, right? Like there's so much more to us. It really seems ridiculous to hate people over their political affiliation.
Yeah, I agree. I do think this is very powerful. At the end of the day, if I'm going to be the guy that goes like peacefully protest, do not be violent, condemn the violence, but
Mhm.
peacefully do what you got to do. And I appreciate the movement from people like MLK who did so much for civil rights. Then I have to abide by that and realize that peace and negotiation is the way for evolution, is the way for making things happen. Riots, violence, demonization, anarchy, that's just going to destroy the country at the end of the day.
Mhm.
It's not going to help anybody. So yeah, there's a lot of power to that. So with that said, kind of the final two questions, or final 2 points, basically. It's not as much of a direct question, but if you had to summarize the point you just made, the things that you were talking about, the kind of the valuable meat and nuggets of the value of independent voting and all that stuff, in like an elevator pitch, and you're talking to a person randomly, what would you say? What would you tell them? How would you describe it?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Okay, so I would say independents are people who want to see government work more than they want to see one party win. And the opportunity is to get more people to participate in politics in a nonpartisan way. You don't have to just vote for a third party, right? You need to go to the ballot box and cast your ballot for whatever you think is closest to your values, independent of political party. That's how we get accountability. That's how we get government that actually works. So if you are interested in learning more about being an independent, our website is www.independentcenter.org. Right now, a bunch of people are reaching out to us through independentcenter.org/declare, declaring their independence. And they're telling us, like, why is it that you are an independent and you're done with both parties? So we would love to hear from people who also feel like, you know what, neither of these parties is for me.
All right, excellent. And then the last thing, when someone has listened to the podcast, kind of different from a summary, what do you hope they gain most from this conversation? What is the biggest takeaway that you hope that they um you know embedded into themselves and take into heart? Like what's that? What is that for you?
So the biggest takeaway, I think, is that we actually can govern ourselves very effectively. We can trust people to make the decisions that are right for them. And we need to create a government that is less focused on people getting and holding power, and instead focus on empowering people to live their lives the way they think is right. And the way we can do that is outside of Republican and Democrat. It's really through empowering independents and having them vote and having them decide, you know, we should all get to decide how we get to live our lives. So I want people to understand that you can engage in politics without doing so just for one team, right? You can be there voting for what you think is right. And it's a huge opportunity. I hope more people join us.
All right, excellent. Any final thoughts, any final things you want to say before we end the show today?
I just want to say thank you, Riddell, for having this podcast in the first place and for the work that you're doing to get people to think more deeply about issues and outside of a partisan framework. I think we need a lot more of this, and I just really appreciate you leading the way on it and the chance to talk with you today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think this was a great conversation. I'm not going to beat around the bush for people listening. I am mean to Donald Trump. I am very mean to Donald Trump. It is what it is. I can't. My values just don't coincide with what stuff he's doing. But ultimately, I don't. I believe in the idea of focusing on solutions, on principal issues, on trying to just make the country better. And I think we all could do that. And I think what you're doing is very good too, very strong. And make sure you guys go check out what they got going on, because being independent can have a lot of value, and just being more informed on what is going on and not being enamored and captured on being forced to believe a Democratic or Republican way is a valuable thing. It's a valuable thing. So With that said, appreciate you coming on to the podcast. It was a great conversation. If you guys are listening, rate the podcast 5 stars. Of course, all their information should be in the description as well. Every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, make sure you guys are listening to the podcast. That said, y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.